Shaquille O'Neal stepped into the business-class cabin with his unmistakable presence, towering like a skyscraper, striding confidently, his demeanor as natural as if the airplane's limited space had to expand to accommodate him. Clad in a perfectly tailored, dark gray suit, Shaq radiated an intriguing blend of legendary authority and endearing simplicity. Despite his global fame, Shaq had a knack for making people feel at ease. A slight nod, a friendly smile, enough to convey, "I'm just here for a quiet flight." Curious glances followed him the moment he entered the plane. A few passengers instantly recognized him. "That's Shaq," whispers rippling through the rows behind. A young couple fumbled to discreetly snap a photo while others smiled in quiet amusement at the celebrity in their midst. Yet, as always, Shaq remained composed. Years of enduring such attention, from basketball courts to grand events, had made him unshakably calm under the spotlight. Shaq's 7-foot-plus frame carried him to his window-side seat. Pausing briefly, he hoisted his medium-sized carry-on into the overhead bin. Even that simple action required him to stoop slightly, as even the spacious business-class cabin struggled to accommodate his stature. A nearby passenger stared, half curious, half incredulous. Shaq responded with a polite smile before settling into his seat, careful not to let the attention disrupt his calm. His seat was ideal. A window view with an unobstructed sightline to the airplane's wing, where the day's final rays still lingered. Adjusting his long legs to avoid encroaching on anyone else's space, an art he had mastered over thousands of flights, Shaq appreciated the relative comfort of business class. Yet he could still sense the discreet gazes from the back. Unbothered, he unzipped his bag and retrieved the business management book he had been reading, The Art of Leadership in the New Century. Beyond basketball, business was a significant passion of his, and this book was part of his ongoing quest for knowledge. Shaq opened the book, leaning back into his seat, savoring a moment of peace before takeoff. The soft rustle of his pages blended with the gentle murmur of scattered conversations throughout the cabin. He skimmed the lines, attempting to focus on the content, but his thoughts inevitably drifted toward the long journey ahead. The recent workload had been intense, and Shaq hoped this flight would provide the respite he needed before diving into another round of events. A flight attendant approached, her professional demeanor tinged with the usual curiosity reserved for high-profile passengers. Rebecca, the lead attendant, paused near Shaq to ensure his comfort. "Is everything all right, Mr. O'Neal?" she asked, her polished smile firmly in place. Shaq nodded slightly. "I'm good, thank you." As Rebecca walked away, Shaq turned to gaze out the window. The sunset painted a golden hue over the wing, a breathtaking scene of fleeting tranquility. He exhaled slowly, closed his eyes momentarily, and let his broad shoulders relax. Despite being accustomed to constant attention, Shaq couldn't shake the feeling that something unsettling loomed ahead. The fleeting calm was interrupted by the heavy footsteps of a new passenger entering the cabin. Shaq opened his eyes, sensing a shift in the atmosphere. A middle-aged man, likely in his 60s, came into view. It was Donald, an imposing figure with a polished appearance, and an air of authority. A man clearly more familiar with giving orders than taking them. His sharp gaze scanned the business-class cabin until it landed on Shaq. For a brief moment, an expression flickered across Donald's face. Discomfort, perhaps prejudice, or simply displeasure at the prospect of sitting near someone who didn't fit his idea of a business-class passenger. Donald slowed as he approached his seat. He glanced at Shaq, furrowing his brow, and let out a faint grunt, as if Shaq's presence were an affront to the sanctity of his travel experience. Placing his bag in the overhead compartment with deliberate force, Donald sank into the middle seat beside Shaq, instantly making the atmosphere feel heavy. Muttering, just loudly enough for Shaq to hear, Donald remarked, "Travel standards these days, absolutely dreadful." Shaq raised an eyebrow, briefly turning to look at Donald, but instead of reacting, he flipped another page in his book. After all, he had faced countless situations like this before, offhand comments, judgmental stares. Today, however, he wanted to maintain his peace. "It's just another flight," he told himself. What Shaq didn't know was that the journey ahead would challenge his patience in ways he hadn't anticipated. Shaquille O'Neal kept flipping through the pages of his book, trying to maintain focus as the atmosphere around him grew increasingly tense. Right beside him, Donald, a middle-aged white man who had just sat down, couldn't hide his irritation. He shifted in his seat, adjusting his chair with exaggerated motions, deliberately displaying his discomfort. After a few minutes, he muttered, loud enough for Shaq and the nearby passengers to hear, "Unbelievable. First-class flight, and I have to deal with this." Shaq glanced at him briefly, his expression calm but tinged with quiet annoyance. He chose not to respond, returning to the book in his hands. He was no stranger to looks and comments like this, remarks he'd faced not only during his sports career but also in everyday life. But today, Shaq was determined to maintain his peace. To him, this was just another flight, and he refused to let someone else's discomfort affect him. Donald, however, had no intention of staying silent. He glanced around as if seeking support from the other passengers, then raised his hand to call the flight attendant. "Excuse me, miss," he called out sharply. "I think there's been some mistake. I booked a first-class seat, not to sit next to him." Rebecca, the lead flight attendant, approached with a professional smile, though hesitation was clear in her eyes. She glanced at Shaq, then back at Donald. "Sir, the seating arrangements are accurate. There's no mistake," she replied evenly. Donald smirked, folding his arms across his chest as if awaiting a more satisfactory response. "No mistake? You don't see how massive he is? He's taken up all the space. I paid for comfort, not to be squished like this." Shaq lowered his book, his gaze sharpening, though his voice remained calm as ever. "I've been keeping everything within my space. If you're uncomfortable, that's your issue, not mine." Shaq's measured response only fueled Donald's anger. He turned back to Rebecca, his tone now more forceful. "I demand to be moved. I can't sit next to him any longer. This flight cannot continue like this." Rebecca hesitated, glancing between Donald and Shaq. Her reluctance was evident, but instead of staying neutral, she leaned slightly toward Donald, as if trying to placate him. "Mr. O'Neal," Rebecca began, her tone gentle but unmistakably suggestive, "if you're uncomfortable, we can arrange for you to move to the economy class. I'm sure you'll find more space there." Shaq's eyebrows shot up in surprise, his displeasure evident. "Are you asking me, the person who paid for this seat, to move just to accommodate his comfort, because he finds me uncomfortable?" Rebecca didn't respond immediately, but her silence spoke volumes. Emboldened, Donald chimed in with a sneer, "Exactly. People like you don't belong here in the first place." The atmosphere in the cabin grew heavy. Conversations that had been murmuring in the background fell silent as passengers turned to eavesdrop on the escalating situation. A few exchanged glances, some showing curiosity, others discomfort. Among them, an older woman seated a row behind, Mrs. Linda, could no longer stay quiet. "Excuse me, but I've been listening from the start," Mrs. Linda said firmly, her voice clear and unwavering. "The one causing trouble here isn't Shaquille O'Neal. It's you. You should be ashamed of yourself." Donald spun around, his angry glare directed at Mrs. Linda. "And who do you think you are, butting in? This is between me and him. Mind your own business." Shaq gave a small, appreciative smile to Mrs. Linda, a silent gesture of thanks, but he knew this was far from over. Rebecca, visibly uncomfortable, looked between the two men again before addressing Shaq. "Mr. O'Neal," she said softly, almost pleading, "I really hope you can understand the situation. Moving seats would make things easier for everyone." Shaq tilted his head slightly, his gaze sharp as he stared directly at Rebecca. "You're trying to keep the peace by pushing me aside to appease him? Do you realize what you're doing?" The tension escalated, and all eyes in the first-class cabin were now fixed on the unfolding drama. At that moment, Donald made a move that worsened the situation. He pulled out his wallet, discreetly extracted a small envelope, and handed it to Rebecca. "This is just a little thank you for your help," Donald said quietly, his tone laced with smugness. "Just make sure he gets moved to economy." Rebecca froze, her hand trembling slightly as she accepted the envelope. What she didn't realize, however, was that a young passenger seated across the aisle, Ethan, had been observing everything. He discreetly pulled out his phone and started recording. Ethan's eyes glimmered with determination, knowing it was time for the truth to come to light. The first-class cabin now felt like a ticking time bomb, and Shaq, with his trademark composure, remained seated, bracing himself for whatever was to come. He knew that his calm demeanor would be his strongest weapon in this battle. Shaquille O'Neal placed the book down on the folding table in front of him, his eyes calm, but failing to conceal his dissatisfaction. Across from him sat Donald, his glare sharp and unyielding, showing no sign of relenting. Once more, Donald called for the flight attendant, Rebecca, his voice brimming with authority, as if he were the commander of this flight. "Attendant!" Donald nearly shouted, drawing the attention of nearby passengers. "I requested a seat change, and I don't understand why this hasn't been resolved. This is a business-class flight, not a public train station." Rebecca, her face visibly flustered, approached with a strained smile. "Sir, as I mentioned earlier, all seats have been assigned, and we have no available spots for a change." Donald scowled, his voice rising in frustration. "Don't tell me he can't be moved to economy. He's clearly taken up too much space, and I didn't pay to be crammed like this." Shaq, maintaining his composed demeanor, slowly raised his head. His eyes met Donald's, sharp and penetrating, as if cutting through layers of arrogance and prejudice. "I believe I've made myself clear, sir. I have no intention of moving from this seat. Perhaps you should come to terms with the fact that not everything will always go your way." Shaq's words, though calm, struck like a slap to Donald's ego. His face flushed red, and his hands gripped the armrests tightly. But before Donald could respond, a young passenger named Ethan, seated a few rows away, suddenly stood up. In his hand was a phone with its screen illuminated, his expression resolute. "Excuse me, everyone," Ethan spoke, his voice steady and clear. "I think people should know what's happening here. This man just tried to bribe the flight attendant to force Shaquille O'Neal out of his seat. I recorded the entire thing." Ethan's statement hit the business-class cabin like a bombshell. Passengers, previously silent or disinterested, now turned their heads toward Donald and Rebecca. Murmurs of discontent rippled through the cabin. Donald shot out of his seat, glaring at Ethan. "What are you talking about? I only asked for fair treatment. Don't make up lies." Ethan remained unflinching. "I have the video, and I don't think this is how a business-class passenger should behave." An older woman, Linda, seated a row behind, stood to back Ethan. "This is the most disgraceful behavior I've ever seen on a flight. Shaquille O'Neal has done nothing wrong. He was quietly reading a book while you, sir, have been nothing but a disruption." Donald turned sharply, his eyes burning with anger. "You don't know anything. This is between me and him. Stay out of it." Shaq stayed seated, his calm gaze unwavering. He didn't need to speak further. Those around him had taken up his defense. Another passenger in a nearby row joined in. "The only person causing trouble here is you. I've been watching, and Shaquille hasn't done a single thing wrong. If anyone needs to leave this flight, it's you." The atmosphere in the cabin had completely shifted. All eyes now focused on Donald and Rebecca instead of Shaq. Several passengers began pulling out their phones to document the scene. Rebecca, standing nearby, paled visibly. She stammered, trying to explain herself. I don't know what he's talking about. This is just a misunderstanding." But the crowd wasn't buying it. The situation was painfully clear. Tensions escalated to the point where Rebecca had no choice but to radio the captain. Her voice quivered as she spoke into her headset. "Captain, I need assistance in the business class cabin. The situation is escalating out of control." Within minutes, the cockpit door opened and the captain emerged. A composed, middle-aged man with an authoritative presence, he scanned the cabin quickly, assessing the scene. "What's going on here?" he asked, his tone firm but not raised. Rebecca hurriedly approached, attempting to regain her professionalism. "Captain, a passenger has been complaining about his seat, and the situation has become tense." Ethan wasted no time handing his phone to the captain. "Sir, I think you should see this. It will explain everything." The captain took the phone, watching the brief video Ethan had recorded. His expression remained neutral, but his eyes sharpened as he absorbed the contents. Once finished, he handed the phone back to Ethan and turned to Donald, his tone now devoid of patience. "Sir," the captain began, his voice steady yet commanding, "your behavior on this flight is unacceptable. You have violated our policies regarding passenger conduct and have disrupted the peace in this cabin. If you do not cease immediately, I will have no choice but to remove you from this flight." Donald, sensing the overwhelming opposition from both the captain and the surrounding passengers, began to lose control. He erupted, his voice filled with fury. "Remove me from the flight? This is outrageous. I paid for this seat, and I have the right to sit here. He's the problem, not me." The captain, his gaze steely, responded without hesitation. "Mr. Donald, this is your final warning. If you continue this behavior, we will be forced to remove you from this aircraft. The choice is yours." Donald bit his lip, his eyes darting around the cabin only to find no allies. He sank back into his seat, muttering angrily under his breath but refraining from further outbursts. The surrounding passengers exhaled in relief, though the tension in the air lingered. Shaq, ever calm, offered a small smile to Ethan and Linda, a silent gesture of gratitude. Though Donald had been silenced, Shaq knew the matter wasn't entirely over. The supportive glances and words from fellow passengers were heartening, yet the echo of the confrontation hung in the air. The day was far from finished. Donald slumped into his seat after being reprimanded by the captain. though silent, his face flushed with anger and humiliation. The atmosphere in the business-class cabin grew stifling, as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. Shaq remained seated, his gaze calm yet piercing as it swept over Donald and Rebecca. He didn't need to say anything more. The situation spoke volumes. Injustice was unraveling piece by piece, and now it was only a matter of time before it shattered completely. Ethan, the young man holding his phone, stood tall, unable to hide his outrage. He glanced around, catching the curious and expectant eyes of the passengers, then stepped forward toward the captain. His voice was steady and firm. "Captain, I believe you need to see this video. It's evidence showing Mr. Donald attempting to bribe flight attendant Rebecca to have Shaquille O'Neal removed from his seat. I cannot sit by and let this continue." The captain, his expression calm but his eyes sharp, took Ethan's phone without a word. He quietly watched the video while the cabin descended into an absolute hush. On the screen, Donald was clearly shown pulling an envelope from his pocket, his furtive yet calculating gaze fixed on Rebecca as he handed it to her. His voice rang out in the recording. "Just get him moved to economy. This is a little thank you for your help." Murmurs began spreading throughout the cabin. A few passengers shook their heads in clear disapproval, while others leaned back in their seats, exhaling as though struggling to process what they were witnessing. A woman seated near Shaq, Mrs. Linda, turned to her neighbor and spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. "This is the most appalling thing I've ever seen on a flight. Some people think money can trample over others." The captain finished watching the video and handed the phone back to Ethan. Turning to Donald, his eyes were devoid of any leniency. His voice was low and firm, carrying across the cabin. "Mr. Donald, your behavior is unacceptable. You have blatantly violated the code of conduct for this flight, and your disrespect toward other passengers, particularly Mr. O'Neal, cannot be ignored. I demand an explanation immediately." Donald shot to his feet, his face turning an even deeper shade of red. He struggled to keep his voice steady, but his loss of control seeped into every word. "Explain what? I did nothing wrong. I simply wanted a comfortable flight. That giant man is taking up too much space, being disruptive, and doesn't belong here. I'm just defending my rights." Shaq remained silent, his calm gaze now carrying a sharp edge. He didn't need to respond. Donald's words were self-damning enough. Other passengers, who had initially hesitated, now stood firmly on Shaq's side. A middle-aged man seated in the row ahead turned around, his voice brimming with indignation. "What are you talking about? Shaq has been quietly reading since we took off. You're the one causing trouble. Stop blaming others for your own embarrassment." Another passenger, a young woman a few rows back, raised her phone and pointed the camera at Donald. "Everyone's witnessing this, and I assure you, the internet will handle the rest." Donald glared at those who spoke out, but had no rebuttal. He turned to Rebecca as if seeking support. However, Rebecca, now pale and trembling, kept her head down, avoiding everyone's gaze. She had realized there was no way out for her either. The captain, standing tall, fixed his sharp gaze on her. "Rebecca, do you have anything to say? I need an explanation immediately." Rebecca stammered, clutching her hands tightly against her chest. "Captain, I was just trying to keep the peace in the cabin. Mr. Donald was complaining a lot, and I thought that moving seats might resolve the issue." The captain raised an eyebrow, his voice colder. "Resolve it by accepting a bribe? Rebecca, you've committed a serious violation of airline policy. This conduct cannot be tolerated, and you will be held accountable." Rebecca bowed her head further, not daring to argue. The surrounding passengers, who had moved from irritation to outright contempt, began voicing their disgust. An older man in the back row spoke loudly. "This is why society doesn't progress. People like Mr. Donald think they can use money to get away with anything. Shameful." The captain turned back to Donald, his voice brimming with authority. "Mr. Donald, I'm requiring you to leave this flight immediately. If you refuse, we will contact airport security upon landing, and you will face legal consequences." Donald's face went pale, though he still tried to maintain a shred of dignity. "Leave the flight? This is an insult. You'll all regret treating me like this." Nearby passengers shook their heads in unison. One woman, unable to hold back any longer, shouted, "Regret it? We just want you gone as soon as possible." Rebecca quietly stepped aside as another flight attendant approached to assist the captain. Together, they escorted Donald out of the cabin despite his continued shouting and complaints. Applause erupted throughout the cabin as Donald exited. Several passengers turned toward Shaq, nodding in solidarity. Shaq offered a small smile and nodded back. As the cabin settled once more, he picked up his book from the tray table, attempting to resume reading. But, deep down, he knew this incident wouldn't end here. Shaq understood that what had transpired, and what had been recorded, would ripple far beyond this flight, leaving a lasting impact. Applause echoed throughout the business class cabin as Donald was escorted off the plane. The passengers, who had silently endured the tension until now, didn't hesitate to express their relief. Some smiled gratefully at Shaquille O'Neal as a gesture of appreciation, while others whispered among themselves about the incident, their irritation with Donald still lingering. Shaq remained seated, his face relaxed but his eyes reflecting contemplation. He held the book on the tray table before him but didn't open it. What had just occurred wasn't merely an argument, it was a confrontation between prejudice and dignity. And Shaq knew this wasn't the first time, nor would it be the last, he would face such a challenge. A few minutes later, Mrs. Linda, the elderly woman who had stood up to support Shaq, approached him. Her face radiated gratitude and solidarity. Standing beside Shaq's seat, she bowed her head slightly. "Mr. O'Neal," she began warmly, "I just want to say that you handled the situation wonderfully. You maintained a composure that very few people could manage in such circumstances. You didn't just stand up for yourself. You made all of us proud with your courage and grace." Shaq looked up, offering a gentle but sincere smile. "Thank you, ma'am. I just believe that sometimes staying calm is the only way to deal with ignorance. People like him aren't worth losing your temper over." Mrs. Linda nodded, her gaze filled with admiration. "You're a big man, not just in stature but also in heart. I think you've taught all of us a valuable lesson today." She patted Shaq's shoulder lightly before returning to her seat, leaving a warmer atmosphere in the cabin. Moments later, Ethan, the young man who had recorded the entire incident, approached with his phone in hand, his face a mix of pride and excitement. "Mr. O'Neal," Ethan said, his voice clear, "I never thought I'd witness something like this in my lifetime. You're not just a legend on the court. Today, you became a legend here. I captured everything, and I promise the truth won't be forgotten." Shaq smiled, reaching out to shake Ethan's hand. "You did good, Ethan. People like you, those willing to stand up for what's right, are the reason I still believe we can make the world a better place. Thank you for not staying silent." Ethan nodded, his eyes shining with pride. "You deserve the support, Mr. Shaq. I'll make sure everyone knows how masterfully you handled this situation." Meanwhile, at the front of the cabin, Rebecca, the head flight attendant, stood silently near the luggage compartment. Her face was pale and her eyes avoided contact with anyone. Since Donald's removal, she had felt the weight of the passengers' disapproving gazes. A middle-aged man walked by, his disappointment evident in his tone as he addressed her. "Rebecca, you had a chance to do the right thing, but you chose to side with the wrong. As a flight attendant, your duty is to treat everyone fairly, not let money or power cloud your judgment." Rebecca lowered her head, unable to respond. His words struck her pride deeply. She couldn't deny the truth. She had made a grave mistake, one she now had to face the consequences for. The captain, after returning to the cockpit, had left her with a brief but sharp warning. "Rebecca, I'll be filing a full report on this incident with the airline. Be prepared for what's coming." Rebecca nodded without meeting the captain's eyes. She knew she had damaged the passenger's trust, a stain that would mark her career. For the remainder of the flight, Rebecca stood in silence, avoiding everyone's gaze. As the cabin settled, Shaq decided it was time to say something. He rose slowly, his towering presence commanding attention. With his deep, warm voice, he addressed the passengers. "Thank you all for standing up for what's right. Today, we've shown that injustice has no place, whether on a flight or in everyday life. What I experienced isn't new, but I'm deeply grateful that this time I didn't have to face it alone. You've all proven that truth and solidarity will always prevail." Applause erupted throughout the cabin. Some passengers rose to cheer, while others shouted, "Shaq, you're amazing," or "Thank you for speaking for us." Shaq bowed his head, a soft smile on his face. Though his words were brief, his message left a profound impression on everyone. He wasn't just a passenger. He was a symbol of dignity, patience, and justice. As the plane prepared to land, the cabin's atmosphere became calmer. Another flight attendant, not Rebecca, approached Shaq with a glass of orange juice. She bent slightly, her voice gentle but sincere. "Mr. O'Neill, we deeply apologize for what happened. I hope the rest of your flight was more pleasant. The airline will review this incident and take appropriate action." Shaq nodded, his soft smile easing her tension. "Thank you. I hope this serves as a lesson for all of us, not just for today, but for the future." When the plane landed and passengers disembarked, many paused to shake Shaq's hand or thank him before leaving. An older man, with a serious demeanor, placed a hand on Shaq's shoulder and said, "You're not just a giant in stature, but a giant in heart. Today, you taught us all something valuable." Shaq smiled and bowed his head in acknowledgement. As he stepped off the plane, the afternoon light hit his face, and he felt a sense of relief. Though the flight had been far from pleasant, it carried a significance far greater than he could have imagined. Ethan's video quickly went viral on social media shortly after the flight landed. Within hours, it became a hot topic with millions of views. The way Shaq calmly handled the injustice and the passengers' support sparked a wave of admiration. Hashtags like Haas Justice for Shaq and Stand Against Discrimination trended worldwide, transforming Shaq, already famous on the basketball court, into a symbol of fairness and patience. The incident didn't end there. Shaq decided to use the attention to launch a campaign raising awareness about prejudice and discrimination. Partnering with social organizations, he used his fame and influence to push for meaningful change. Meanwhile, Donald faced severe consequences. He was widely criticized on social media, his reputation destroyed, and both his career and relationships suffered immensely. Rebecca wasn't spared either. She was suspended and required to attend customer service and anti-discrimination training. What began as an ordinary flight turned into a symbolic story, proving that truth and justice always find a way to prevail. And in this story, Shaquille O'Neal was not just a passenger, he was a hero. After leaving the airport, Shaquille O'Neal stepped into the waiting car. The warm, golden sunlight streamed through the window, casting a contemplative glow on his face. The flight he had just taken wasn't merely a physical journey, but also a profound emotional one. Shaq hadn't just faced injustice, he had also witnessed the power of unity from strangers. This left him feeling both burdened and hopeful. Shaq's phone buzzed incessantly. Messages, calls, and notifications poured in from friends, colleagues, and even strangers. One text from Charles Barkley, his former teammate, made him smile. "Shaq, I just saw the video. You're a legend, not just on the court, but in how you handle life. Proud to call you my friend." Shaq didn't respond right away. Instead, he opened a social media platform to better understand the impact of what had transpired. Sure enough, his story had become a sensation. The video Ethan had recorded was spreading like wildfire, with comments overflowing with empathy and support. Shaq isn't just big in stature, his heart is even bigger. He's shown us that calmness and self-respect are the strongest weapons. A powerful lesson in unity. This is how we confront injustice. Shaq lingered on the screen, not because of the fame, but because he realized this story had grown beyond a personal experience. It had become a symbol. Social organizations and movements advocating for justice quickly used the story to amplify messages against prejudice and discrimination. A campaign called Stand with Shaq was launched, urging communities to unite for fairness and mutual respect across all sectors. Shaq was invited to be the spokesperson for the campaign. In the first video he recorded to kickstart the movement, his voice resonated, warm and sincere. Prejudice isn't something that appears overnight, and it won't disappear in a day. But we can start by speaking the truth. What I experienced isn't just my story, it's the story of countless others who faced injustice. But today, I wasn't alone. Those who stood up for me showed me that when we unite, change is possible. The video garnered millions of views within hours, and the hashtag #JusticeForShaq quickly trended. Articles, podcasts, and TV programs reference the story as a testament to the importance of courage and solidarity in society. Unlike Shaq, Donald and Rebecca faced severe repercussions. For Donald, the video capturing his behavior was undeniable evidence. The company, where he held a senior leadership role, promptly announced his termination, accompanied by a statement. "We do not tolerate any actions that contradict the core values of our organization." Donald's reputation was shattered. Friends, colleagues, and even family distanced themselves from him. Social media was flooded with criticism, with many calling him the embodiment of outdated prejudice. Donald tried to explain, but every justification only made matters worse. Rebecca, the head flight attendant, wasn't spared public scrutiny. She was suspended immediately after the airline received a detailed report from the captain and Ethan's video. An internal investigation was launched, and Rebecca was required to attend anti-discrimination training and sensitivity workshops. While she wasn't fired outright, her reputation suffered greatly, casting a shadow over her future career. Weeks later, Shaq appeared on a live television interview. The host asked him about his feelings and reflections after the incident. With his trademark calm demeanor, Shaq replied, "That wasn't the first time I faced prejudice, and I know it won't be the last. But what moved me was how the people on that flight stood up for what was right. I don't want people to focus solely on me, but on the bigger message. We can't let injustice happen without taking action. Sometimes even a small act can lead to significant change." Shaq's words sparked a wave of inspiration. He wasn't just a symbol of justice. He became a guiding light for others confronting injustice in their own lives. Shaq decided to establish a nonprofit organization called Equality Matters, dedicated to supporting victims of discrimination and raising awareness about social equity. The organization quickly garnered support and funding from businesses, prominent individuals, and communities worldwide. In the months that followed, Shaq spent much of his time visiting schools, hosting workshops, and engaging with communities. He shared his story from the flight not just as a personal lesson, but as a call to action. We can't change how others see us overnight, but we can control how we respond. Remember, calmness, self-respect, and unity are our most powerful weapons. Young audiences listened intently, their eyes shining with admiration. One student asked, "Mr. Shaq, what kept you from getting angry on that flight?" Shaq smiled, his gaze soft but profound. "Because I know that anger never wins the real battle. Truth and self-respect will always do. That for you." The story of Shaq and that pivotal flight became more than a fleeting event. It was referenced in seminars, lectures, and even life skills textbooks. It became a prime example of how people can combat injustice with dignity and effectiveness. For Shaq, life moved forward. But this new journey added a deeply meaningful chapter to his legacy. A chapter not just about victories on the basketball court, but about the strength of character, patience, and compassion. And somewhere, when people spoke of Shaquille O'Neal, they didn't just remember a basketball legend. They remembered a symbol of positive change in society. After the incident on the flight, Shaquille O'Neal's life went on, but it was no longer the same. Although he had grown accustomed to public attention since his days as a basketball star, this time, the spotlight wasn't on his illustrious career or his athletic achievements. It was on the story of how he confronted injustice. The incident on the flight wasn't just a random event. It became the starting point of a powerful movement that extended far beyond the cramped confines of an airplane cabin. Shaq's story quickly became a global media sensation. A video of the incident spread like wildfire, garnering millions of shares and comments. Hashtags like "Justice for Shaq" and "Stand with Shaq" trended relentlessly on social media. Thousands of people from all over the world expressed their support for Shaq, not just for his composure and character, but because they saw themselves in his story. They too had endured injustices but lacked the opportunity to push back. News articles about the event appeared everywhere, from sports pages to prestigious social issue magazines. A piece in the New York Times noted, "Shaquille O'Neal has shown us a way to confront injustice without resorting to anger. He is not just a sports icon, but a symbol of patience and inner strength." The story didn't end there. Numerous nonprofit organizations and social movements used the event as a vivid example to raise awareness about societal injustices. One group, Equality in Action, organized workshops on how to confront prejudice and discrimination, featuring Shaq's story as a testament to the power of unity. Shaq didn't stand idly by as these waves of impact spread. He actively participated. He decided to establish a nonprofit organization called Equality Matters, focusing on raising awareness about equality and supporting those who had faced discrimination. His organization quickly gained support from the community and even large corporations. One of the organization's most notable initiatives was a program called Voice for All, where individuals who had experienced injustice could share their stories and receive support from the community. Within just a few months, the program attracted millions of participants, creating a global network of connection and solidarity. At the launch event for his charity, Shaq stood before hundreds of attendees and declared, "I don't want my story to be just something people talk about. I want it to be a lesson, a motivation for us to act. No one deserves to face prejudice, and it's our responsibility to make this world better." His words left the room silent for a few moments before erupting in thunderous applause. Shaq began dedicating more time to meeting and connecting with young people. He visited schools and underserved communities to share his story and the lessons he had learned. At a high school in a struggling neighborhood, he stood before hundreds of students and recounted his experience on the flight. "We can't control how others treat us," Shaq said, "but we can control how we respond. The most important thing is to hold on to your self-respect and never let anyone make you feel less than you are. Your value isn't defined by how others see you, but by how you see yourself." After his speech, a group of students approached him. One boy asked, "Mr. Shaq, how did you stay calm in that situation? I don't think I could have done that." Shaq smiled and placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "I've been angry many times in my life," he said, "but I've learned that when you stay calm, you not only control the situation, you control yourself. Anger takes away your power, but composure gives it back." His response left the students not only admiring him but also reflecting deeply. Some even began sharing their own stories of injustice with Shaq, stories of struggles they had endured. Shaq listened intently to each one, encouraging them to stand tall, be strong, and never let themselves be defeated. While Shaq was being praised, Donald and Rebecca faced serious consequences. Donald, after being fired, virtually disappeared from the public eye. He attempted to defend himself in a social media post, but his words only fueled more outrage. His reputation was destroyed, and his family suffered significant fallout. Rebecca, though not immediately terminated, faced judgment from colleagues and passengers alike. She enrolled in cultural awareness and conflict resolution training, but eventually decided to resign. In a later interview, she admitted, "I made a mistake, and I have to take responsibility. This incident taught me that respect isn't just a job requirement. It's something that has to come from the heart." Years later, the story of Shaquille O'Neal and that fateful flight was still being told. Schools and organizations used it as an example of how to confront prejudice and the power of patience. A documentary titled Shaq, Beyond the Court premiered, chronicling this incident along with other defining moments in his life. The film was warmly received and inspired millions. For Shaq, the incident on the flight wasn't the end point. It was a chapter in his ongoing journey. He continued fighting for fairness, not just against discrimination but also for education and better living conditions in underserved communities. One day, during a visit to an educational center in a remote area, Shaq noticed a drawing by a young boy. It depicted him holding a torch with the words, "Shaq, the one who lights the way for us." Shaq stood silently in front of the picture for a long time. He didn't seek titles or accolades. All he needed was to know that what he was doing mattered. As he stepped outside, the evening sun stretched across the path ahead, and Shaq took a deep breath. The journey was far from over, but he knew he was on the right path, the path of hope, truth, and justice. As time passed, the story of Shaquille O'Neal and the fateful flight became a symbol, not just of confronting prejudice, but also of the lasting change an individual can bring about. For Shaq, however, it wasn't the end. He understood that his journey was just beginning, and that story was merely one chapter in a larger book about justice and hope. Following the incident on the flight, Shaq became increasingly involved in social initiatives. He tirelessly expanded Equality Matters, transforming it into a powerful platform for the underprivileged. New initiatives were launched continuously, ranging from educational programs for children in underserved areas to workshops for businesses to enhance awareness about diversity and inclusion. One particularly successful initiative was the From Words to Action campaign, where individuals could learn how to translate the values of equality from words into actions in their daily lives. The campaign attracted millions of participants, not only in the U.S. but also globally. Shaq also worked actively with lawmakers, advocating for stricter policies against discrimination, particularly in areas like aviation, education, and workplace environments. His dedication helped pass several new laws aimed at protecting the rights of all individuals, regardless of culture, ethnicity, or gender. Despite receiving widespread support, Shaq refused to let hatred or bitterness consume him. He firmly believed that real change comes not just from condemnation, but from education and reconciliation. Rebecca, after resigning from her position, reached out to Shaq to apologize. In a private meeting, she admitted her mistakes and shared how the incident had changed her worldview. "I got caught up in prejudice without realizing it," Rebecca confessed, her eyes filled with remorse. "But thanks to you and how you handled the situation, I've learned that everyone deserves respect, no matter who they are." Shaq listened and then responded with his characteristic calmness. "I hold no grudge against you. Mistakes are part of being human. What matters is what we learn from them and how we use those lessons to do better. I hope you'll use this experience to help others." The meeting ended with a handshake, leaving both with a sense of relief. Years later, while Shaq was speaking at an international conference on social justice, a young man in the audience posed a question. "Mr. Shaq, looking back at everything, what do you think is the most important lesson we should learn?" Shaq smiled, his eyes scanning the room as though addressing each person individually. His voice was deep and warm as he replied, "The most important lesson is understanding. When we understand that everyone holds equal value, prejudice and fear dissolve. But understanding doesn't come naturally. It comes from listening, learning, and sometimes facing challenges like I did. Never be afraid to stand up for what's right. Every small action you take today can create a better world for future generations." After the speech, a young boy approached Shaq. His eyes were bright, and his shy smile radiated admiration. He said, "Mr. Shaq, I want to be like you, helping people and making the world a better place." Shaq knelt down, placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, and replied, "You don't have to be like me. Be the best version of yourself, and remember, as long as you stand up for what's right, you're already a hero." Shaq's story wasn't just mentioned in newspapers or casual conversations. It was written into textbooks and included in courses on ethics and social justice. It became a timeless symbol, a testament to how one person can create monumental change simply by staying true to their values. Shaq kept moving forward. Even in his 50s, he remained devoted to social causes, using his fame and influence to inspire others. He understood that this journey wasn't just for him, but also for those who had faced or would face injustice. One day, while walking through a park, Shaq saw a group of kids playing basketball. The smallest boy in the group shouted excitedly, "Look, it's Shaquille O'Neal." The group stopped, eagerly gathering around him. One boy asked, "Mr. Shaq, what's your secret to being so strong like you?" Shaq smiled, took the ball from the boy's hands, spun it expertly on his finger, and replied, "Strength isn't just in your muscles. It's in your heart and how you treat others. If you remember that, you won't just be strong, you'll be amazing." As he walked away, Shaq felt a warmth in his heart. His journey might never end, but that was what made life meaningful. He was no longer just a legend on the basketball court, but a beacon of hope for the world. For Shaq, every step was a spark, and he would continue to move forward, carrying the light of justice, compassion, and the belief that everything can change, if we dare to begin. The story of Shaquille O'Neal was not just a personal anecdote, but a vivid demonstration of the power of patience, dignity, and unity in fighting injustice. Through it, we learn that every action, no matter how small, can contribute to building a fairer and kinder world. Shaq chose not to confront prejudice with anger, but with calmness and compassion, values that helped him not only overcome adversity but also inspire millions. Let this story serve as a reminder that change doesn't start with grand gestures, but with the determination of each of us. If you found this story meaningful, subscribe to the channel to never miss more inspiring stories. Together, we can spread good values and make a difference.